Nope. Now we're recording. So, hello everybody. I thought we would do a special episode today. I have brought on the queen of cosmic horror herself, Mary SanGiovanni, who we
Hello.
also refer to as the professor because she's got them smarts going on. She's going to come here today and explain to us what really is cosmic horror. Some of us, and that includes me, we get a little confused about what cosmic horror is. It's one of those genres that covers a multitude of things. And I think we can sometimes get those little details a little mixed up. So Mary, if you could please explain to us low lives, what exactly the major hallmarks of cosmic horror, if you please.
Surely. In my having researched this for Cosmic Shenanigans, when I was doing the Cosmic Shenanigans podcast, I wanted to come up with what I thought would be fairly uniform criteria for determining whether or not something was cosmic horror. Because as you said, a lot of it can encompass a lot of things, and it can also bleed into things that may have sort of cosmic horror tropes or overtones or whatever, but are not really cosmic horror stories. And as you mentioned, one of them is, a lot of, ocean monsters, which may or may not be cosmic horror. But to me, a story is cosmic horror if the antagonistic force is of such a scope that it dwarfs humanity's presence, it dwarfs their accomplishments, and basically renders a lot of what humanity's motivations to keep going are. It renders them more or less irrelevant, because the scope of this thing is so big. I try to liken the creatures to like a black hole. A black hole let's suppose a black hole was sentient. It doesn't know you exist, and it doesn't much care whether you do or not. But if you were to get close enough to it, if you were to be within its sphere of influence and its sphere of comprehension, I guess, it would suck you in and crush you, and there'd be nothing you could do to prevent that, because its power is one of the strongest in the universe, and its feelings toward you would be rather indifferent. It wouldn't care necessarily that it's crushing you. It doesn't have any moral obligation not to, but whatever its motivations would be so alien to us, so foreign to us, that they'd be beyond comprehension. So basically, the scope of the monster, the scope of whatever antagonistic force it is something which basically renders humanity's significance to nil, more or less. That's the primary thing, I think. The secondary thing is that there's usually a sense of because of that, I guess, that insignificant aspect of humanity, there's often a sense of nihilistic hopelessness. Now, the way that characters handle that has evolved since Lovecraft's time, but in Lovecraft's stories, one of the reasons his characters were not, terribly well developed, I mean, partially because I think some of them were somewhat Mary Sues of him, but mostly because I think what it came down to was his belief in the stories, at least, that humanity was largely insignificant in the grander scheme of the universe, and that really any individual or any individual accomplishment would be lost in the sea of infinite horror that was waiting out there. So it's not so much that there isn't great characterization, because in good cosmic horror there is, but there is often a sense of a greater purpose rather than individual focus, which is weird because there's a lot of psychological horror aspects to cosmic horror. And psychological horror usually focuses on the internal or the individual. In this, I think with cosmic horror, though, it takes that psychological horror and it basically says that your internal psychological reflections ultimately are going to prove that this is well beyond you. This is well beyond your individual psychology. The other thing that I think universally cosmic horror has, regardless of whether it's straight up Lovecraft type horror or any permutation before or since, is a sense of fluidity, a sense of change. There is, because cosmic horror is very flexible, and again, it almost seems contradictory if you look at Lovecraft's work, because Lovecraft imposed a lot of very rigid structural things on his own writing. The language was very antiquated deliberately. He tended to stay away from really delving too deeply into spiritual, religious, philosophical things, despite the fact that the discovery of these cosmic horrors would shake the very foundation of any kind of religious or spiritual belief. But he was an atheist personally, and so he tried to give a lot of his work a scientific bend. It always had this fairly similar structure. All of his stories had a very similar structure. But cosmic horror itself is a subgenre of fluidity. Fluidity of mind. We see people going insane all the time. Fluidity of body. There's actually a lot more body horror in cosmic horror than people think, because a lot of people change into things. People become creatures. There's a lot of intermingling of people and creatures. And basically fluidity of reality, fluidity, so that you're never quite sure if what you're experiencing is internal or external. And in cosmic horror, you often reach a point where it doesn't matter, because reality, nothing in cosmic horror is stable and secure and can be counted on to remain unchanging. So to me, any kind of cosmic horror, to sum it up, basically, you've got an antagonistic force of great, like, cosmic universal scope, and you've got a sense of fluidity. And those two things often characterize a lot of, they basically are the reasons for a lot of the tropes that we see. You see cults who are dedicated to, bringing about this change. You see this quest for the forbidden, almost always, at least in Lovecraft's work. There's this quest for forbidden knowledge that once you know it, you can't unknow it. And I do think there are some evolutionary differences between Lovecraft's approach to cosmic horror and how a lot of modern cosmic horror has evolved since then. But at least those two or three primary elements remain fairly unchanging. I think they're pretty much what defines cosmic horror.
Can I ask you to expand real quick on the relationship and the interactions between people and the cosmic beings? Because you mentioned cults, and a lot of cosmic horror has cults. I love a good cult story, but I often, you see some of these people, they are sometimes apocalyptic cults. They do not care. They long for the end. And sometimes it is sort of a journey to try to touch power is what they're going for. And without fail, it never goes quite the way they think it will. So maybe from the point of view of the cosmic one, what would the interaction be between this great being and these little insignificant people?
I think for Lovecraft, he meant to leave it deliberately vague. He meant to show that these entities don't think of us as anything more than playthings. That they created us out of boredom, and when they got tired of us, they left. That we are almost under their radar, the way that ants are kind of under our radar for the most part, until one happens to be crawling in your personal space, and then it's like, oh no, I've got to squish you, you've got to go. And I think with Lovecraft, that was what he thought the relationship between the entities and the people were. The cults in Lovecraft's work were primarily, I think, a factor of his racist views, because they were essentially bringing a different way of thinking into what would otherwise be a safe and secure, charmed New England life. They seem to represent in cosmic horror at large that sense of groupthink rather than any individual, and that as a group, maybe there is some significance that could be achieved by bringing about this monumental change in the universe by having, either letting these creatures through from their other dimensions or waking them up or finally summoning them to reclaim the power that they once had. The creatures themselves, in very, very few cosmic horror stories, do we get a sense of what the creatures feel toward us or may think toward us, because it would sort of be like trying to classify what, like, if you really were to analyze it, what God or the devil thinks of us. I mean, these are entities that represent something that's almost outside of human comprehension, really. We can approximate it, but it's never really going to be accurate because we don't know how gods think. We don't know how ultimate evils think. And I think that in some attempts in cosmic horror to try to define what these ancient entities or these gods of other realms might think of us, it almost comes across as being flat, because it would be so much more complicated than we could possibly conceive. However, there have been a few which I think maybe come close. They approach kind of close to trying to understand what a godlike entity might need with us in the first place. And those I find fascinating because they are the few cosmic horror stories that bring the nihilism of hopelessness and insignificance up to the God level, that these gods, for whatever reason, need us. They need, at least, and Lovecraft, Cthulhu had been a high priest of some sort. And it was his magic that allowed the other entities at his level whatever power they had. Ultimately, they lost the war. And that's why, they were banished, to far reaches of space or under the sea, et cetera, et cetera. But it was their magic that they had stolen, I think, from the elder ones, the ones that came before them, this power of creation and destruction. And they teach that through dreams and visions and whatnot to people. And that kind of idea has persisted in that, because we don't understand all of their motivations, we assume they're doing something nice for us. That if we are, slavishly devoted to helping these entities achieve their goals, that they will somehow bless us with power or spare us the ultimate cleansing of the planet where they just destroy everything. And that somehow we will be significant, we will be special. So I think that's the appeal to them, to the cultists, let's say, of helping these gods, that ultimately we can achieve something greater in the eyes of this, ultimate cosmic being. But really, they're using us. And I find it interesting that something with godlike power would need us at all. But the implications in these few stories where this does come up is that they're stuck without us. Without imparting that magic of creation and destruction and of, summoning and traveling through portals and moving through space, they have to teach it to somebody, because whatever condition they're in, they can't do it themselves. So they're helpless in a way. And there's something sort of horrific on a cosmic scale that if your gods are helpless, then what chance do we stand? And so it takes that nihilistic horror, I think, to another level, that even the gods are insignificant in some ways, that that they don't have the ultimate power, that there might be something even greater than they are, which would make humanity almost, non-existent in the grand scheme of things. And I find those kind of stories kind of interesting, because they are the only ones, I think, that really attempt to explain what gods and monsters might be thinking. There was one movie, and I wish I could remember the name of it. It was a sort of a science fiction horror movie about these ultimate entities and summoning them back and forth and banishing them to other dimensions. And the creature there had a mate in this movie. He, I guess, I think it was a male entity, had a partner who was banished. And it was absolutely enraged that these people had banished its mate. And a lot of cosmic horror tends to set up these creatures as being completely unfeeling, that they have absolutely no feelings about anything. They're malevolent at best, or at worst, I guess, and indifferent at best. And I thought it was interesting that the story tried to explain that they do have feelings. They just don't have any feelings toward us. But that they like each other, more or less, or that they hate each other, like that there is a level of feeling. And a lot of times I think when, like I said, I think when you try to delve into what these gods and monsters must be thinking, it's almost scarier in a way, because what you come to realize is that whatever we can relate to about them is usually their weaknesses. And that's scary. I mean, I think the primary comfort of religion is putting your faith and your trust in the hands of somebody who knows everything, can take care of everything. Ultimately, that's why, a lot of religions call God the Father, that he's basically a force to protect you and to comfort you, and that he knows best. And in the end, everything's going to be okay because he knows what he's doing. In cosmic horror, it negates that. It basically says that any kind of godlike entity is really no better off than we are, except that it has powers to destroy. But that it's just as fallible as we are. And I think there's something kind of terrifying about that cosmic horror just gleefully embraces.
Thank you very much. One more thing, and I think, sometimes people get confused because cosmic horror definitely implies these are not terrestrial creatures. Even though they might live here now, they are not from here. What do you think is the significance with so much cosmic horror with the ocean?
I think that's almost a direct descending notion from Lovecraft. If you look at the varied life forms that appear on this planet, everything on land basically in some way sort of functions like us. You got reptiles and you've got mammals. Mammals are, more or less, because we're mammals, so we understand those basic principles. But there's a sense of alienness to anything in the ocean. They don't function like us. They don't function like mammals. They don't function like lizards. I mean, we can try to classify them as close as we can to things that we understand, but they look frightening. They look scary. There's a lot of appendages that don't always make sense to us, and they don't appear to have all the sensory organs that we would think that creatures would need in order to function, in order to survive. I think there's an element of that. I mean, Lovecraft, he grew up in New England, so he was around the sea all the time. And I think the sea and space to him were synonymous in the sense that they were like the great unexplored area, that the potential for anything could happen there. And even today, there are parts of the ocean that we can't explore. We just don't have the technology to reach those depths, without our little ships being crushed or whatever. And sometimes things wash up on shore from those great depths that we're like, oh my God, I can't believe there are things that deep down there. So I think it's partly that. I think he thought of the ocean as the closest thing to space that we have on this planet, that sort of great unexplored territory where the potential for any kind of creature out there could exist. I think there was, and I've never read anything to confirm or deny this, but I get the sense that he found them um, the least palatable, maybe the least uh, the least kind of empathetic type creatures on this planet. That if there were creatures that would be have completely alien ways of thinking about things, it would be sea creatures, because a lot of his creatures tend to be they tend to mirror the physical features of ocean creatures, and of course, because there are these sort of great unknown areas of the ocean, he could tuck away some of his creatures in the ocean and have them spawning and doing whatever else monsters do in their free time, away from the eyes of people. Whereas I think that when he was writing, it was, it was on the heels of all of this, new invention and these moves forward in technology and science, where people were claiming, scientists were claiming at the time that pretty soon there would be no unexplored areas of the world, that, jungles and forests and Arctic and everything, that they were going to cover all of it, but they could never cover the ocean entirely. And I think that's where that link is. And there is some aquatic horror, which is cosmic horror, like Underwater, which I think came out in 2018, 2019, something like that. Or even further back, the movie Triangle. But those are not cosmic horror because they take place in or around the ocean. They're cosmic horror because of the other elements that we talked about. They just happen to be set in the ocean because, again, it's a mirror of space, more or less. You are trapped in an environment where you can't breathe if you're outside of your vehicle. You're surrounded by unfamiliar things. It's dark. It's cold. It is as inhospitable and alien a place on Earth as you can get. And I think that's where the connection is. And I think also because, because of where he grew up, the ocean was a major source of life to those people. Most people were fishermen. They that was their livelihood. And to think that the ocean could also be this cosmic level force that was indifferent to your survival, I think sort of fit in with his aesthetic.
I also just want to squeeze in real quick. As much as you think beachside living would be wonderful, and I'm sure, from behind a window it would be, but if you read enough Lovecraft, you get the sense of the horrible stink of
Yes.
the ocean. He
Yes.
talked about it all the time, the god awful stink of the dead fish and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Every time people start talking about, Lovecraft and being by the ocean, and immediately stink. That's the first thing that always comes into my mind.
Even so far as the people, like when he wrote about Innismouth, he said all the people smelled like that too. They all smelled like brine and dead fish, and I mean, it really is. It is, the ocean is a very inhospitable place. Sailors have all kinds of superstitions and warnings about, like, you can love the sea, but the sea is never going to love you back. And I think that romanticized in a way, and put through all kinds of horror filters, makes for a pretty good setting for any kind of horror story, but especially for cosmic horror, because water itself is a fluid medium. It is ever changing. And I think there's a lot of little bells and whistles about the ocean that I think just ticked all the right boxes for Lovecraft. And I think that's kind of carried down today.
God, you're so smart. Thank you. Thank you so much for peeking in and doing this. I hope this cleared up some things for people. This isn't just for, some of the listeners. I was doing research on a particular book recently, and I was reading the reviews for the book. And there does seem to be out there quite a bit of confusion about what is actually cosmic horror, because I think for some people, just because the imagery of Great Cthulhu rising from the sea, I'm hitting stuff over here, it's so intertwined with what you immediately think of as cosmic horror. So a lot of people automatically think something ancient in the ocean is definitely going to be cosmic
Mm-hmm.
horror. And something ancient in the ocean that likes to manipulate people is instantly cosmic horror. But as you have so eloquently explained to us, there are some nuances to it that you need a little more than that, a little more than that. So thank you very much for doing this. People, you can still listen to all of Cosmic Shenanigans. I will link it down below in the video description. Now, I listened to it. That's why I knew to talk to this lady. So you need to get on that. And I'll link all of Mary's, wonderful links below. If you are unfamiliar with her, congratulations on living under a rock. Please come out. It's nice out here. And I will talk to you all next week. We will be on the book section of Weird Monsters next week. So I'll see you then. Mary, thank you so much for doing this with me. So,
oh, thank you. Thank you for having me and letting me babble about cosmic horror things that I love.
Your babbling is better than, seriously, I told you, I had you on here to explain, because if I tried, it would be a bunch of spitting and sputtering. My video last week, I couldn't remember the phrase video description box. And I sat and went, I'm going to list this all below in the, and so thank you so much for adding a bit of intelligence to my channel.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.